So we haven't haven't started yet, but yeah, I'm interested if anyone has any particular areas that are of interest they'd like to talk about. I'm primarily going to be talking about creating a development environment for Drupal using Nix, but I'm going to go over what Nix is and various parts of it at a fairly high level. There's a lot to it, but yeah, any other questions before we get started? Or
How did you come across this?
yeah, I actually have a slide on that, so I'll talk a little bit about that.
We won't preempt you.
Yep. Any other areas? Do they?
Have you found in like in your use of Nix that it is kind of like a disk space hog?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, it's not just me.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I got a slide in there of like the pros and cons necessarily. That's definitely one of the cons. It's probably the biggest con that I see.
What was that?
Disk space. It's hungry on disk space. Essentially, every generation of things you build in Nix takes up disk space, and there's some optimizing to reduce that, but for the most part, you have a bunch of copies of everything, until you go and garbage collect.
So Docker.
I was gonna say more so than Docker. Like,
um,
it's a little easier to see where it gets cleaned up from in Nix, okay, than it is in Docker, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. Like if Docker, if you leave a container running for a long time, then you end up with large Docker volumes and stuff. I think it's probably pretty similar in that. You know, because the nice thing about Docker is, you know, if you can blow it away and redo it, then you're clearing that up. Well, I see 410, so may as well get started here. So this is a talk about Nix and Drupal development, and so if that's of interest to you or want to check it out and have an idea of what it is, you're in the right place. I'm going to start with just a couple of the problems that I ran across that led me to Nix. So first of all, um, I had in one of our client sites, we had an ancient React library that wouldn't build with anything current. And you know, we started going down the path of updating React and Node.js, but we were just getting build errors. Another problem that we had, well, this is more me because a shiny new thing, I want to go check it out. KDE, you know, KDE 6, Plasma 6 came out last year, and a couple months before the new Ubuntu release, it wasn't available. It wasn't going into the new release. I'm like, huh, I want to check that out. But also, there's just a wide variety of things that I'm constantly trying out and seeing what's new and what's there. Another problem is running simultaneous versions of PHP for getting into more Drupal specific things. If you have old Drupal sites that need old PHP or WordPress, that various things, and Drupal 11 is forcing an upgrade to PHP 8.3, we have a couple of dev servers with all our sites on it, and managing different versions so that you can run it with Drush is a real challenge. So, you know, there's ways of solving these things, but that's some of the stuff. So, who am I? I'm John from Freelock, John Locke. I've been coming to DrupalCons. This is my 5th DrupalCon, and I've spoken before on a few widely ranging topics from DevOps to front-end development and to ECA. And I've been in the Drupal world doing Drupal stuff since 2008. Nix I'm brand new to. So with Nix, I first heard of it about 10 years ago, and it was already, I didn't realize it then even, but it's like 20 years old at this point. 10 years ago, I heard of it in the context of Matrix. I do a lot with Matrix, and there were some Nix folks in there trying to figure out how to get Matrix running in Nix. So I saw it, didn't think anything of it, didn't even like figure out what it was. And then about 2, 3 years ago, I started hearing on various Linux podcasts, people were starting to talk about Nix and starting to try it out and swear by it. And it's like, this is the greatest thing. This is the next generation of Linux. This is all this stuff. I still didn't try it until last January. Came across that first problem of trying to build React, and then just dove in and solved it immediately. It was like half an hour to solve the problem, and I was hooked. So so for the past year and a quarter, I've been kind of, besides Drupal development on the side, I've been solving things with Nix in our own infrastructure, and I'm running Nix OS on my laptop right now, displaying this. So basically what we're going to cover today, 3 main areas. First section, we're going to just talk about what Nix is, what some of the elements are, how flakes work. Then we're going to go look at how we solve those problems that I started with. And then we're going to spend most of our time, or well, I don't know how much of the time this is going to take, but Drupal Flake is something that I just created, finally got working 2 weeks ago. So this is really brand new. And this is a DDev-like environment that you can use today for developing in Drupal. And I'd love to get other people involved and checking it out, giving us feedback. So that's what we're going to be doing. So starting out here with the intro to Nix. So what is Nix? Nix starts with being a language. It's a functional programming language. And the main purpose of it, the main target of it, is a package manager. So those to me seem like the fundamental things that Nix is. It's a functional language that takes something that looks a lot like JavaScript or JSON and adds functions to it so that you can nest where you'd have an object in JavaScript. It can be an object or it can be a function, kind of like JavaScript itself. Functions are first class. And then there's a whole bunch of programs and utilities around it. Nix shell is going to be one of the key ones that we're going to talk about here. That's really powerful. There's a few different generations of Nix. So I put up here old Nix and new Nix. So Nix itself is pretty much, I don't know how long it's been this way. I'm not very deep in the Nix community, so I don't know a whole lot of the history here. What I do know is that flakes were the big deal for Nix, and they came out in 2019, and they're still in the main Nix installer considered experimental. And so that's one of the key things. So flakes, I think, give a nice overview of Nix itself. So the other parts of Nix, I thought we'd just dive right into what's a flake. And so a flake is basically a file. It's kind of like the composer JSON for whatever Nix project you're on. You're going to have a top-level flake.nix file, and all it needs is an output that is a function that returns an object, more or less. This is a valid flake. It generally has inputs, and inputs are kind of the sources for what goes into the outputs. And it can have some other metadata like description, stuff like that. So the inputs are kind of the core thing. There are some that you don't have to specify, Nix packages being one of them, but I put it here for illustration. So one of the key things about Nix packages is it's basically just a Git repo, and there's a bunch of different branches in it, and you can fork it and point this at your own clone of Git or of Nix packages, make any changes you make, point your flake at it, and now you've got your own isolated version. It's just entirely distributed. There are a couple of central repos and places that are assumed to be here, but they're easily replaced by your own. So that's one really cool thing about Nix. The outputs here are required. That's the one thing that's required in a flake. So most flakes will start with a default package. So Very much the idea of Nix is that you are building packages. They also call them derivations, and a derivation is basically a something that ends up in your Nix store, and we'll talk about stores a little bit later, but it's basically a directory tree that contains the built output of whatever is going into the recipe. And so a package is what this output, or what this flake outputs, one of the things it outputs. And so this one here is basically saying, get a copy of Nginx from Nix packages, and that's my output. So this by itself just basically is repackaging Nginx. So another thing about flakes that make them really powerful is they're assuming cross architecture for all these packages. So for most of the tools, you will need to have systems specified. And these are the kind of the default systems that are baked into Nix in general. And so with flakes then, here's some of the functional language that's iterating through and basically output of package of Nix. So this flake will run on any supported platform right here and not just x86 Linux. Nix build is how you output the package at the basic level. So you take your package, you run Nix build. Our flakes are getting more sophisticated here. So we're pulling in some libraries that have some additional functionality. Flake parts is one of the key ones that allows you to break your flakes down into smaller files and include them and import them. And then iterate through and handle that system stuff. So pretty much every flake you see is going to use either flake parts or flake utils to provide some wrapper so you don't have to repeat for every system everything that you're doing. Just a lot of little convenience functions. And as they get more sophisticated, we start having more targets. So now, in addition to packages, we're providing an app. An app is something that you can run directly with a Nix run. So Nix build builds a package. Nix run will execute it right in the shell that you've got. And what it does is it takes, if it's a package that you're providing and you haven't specified exactly a command to run, then it will run the name of the output package /bin / the name of the package again is kind of the default that's in there. And then that's just basically it. You can set up in here command line flags. This is kind of these are kind of the atoms that we're working with that we're building up. Yes?
Is it kind of like a flat pack or like a snap?
It's doing, the question is it like a flat pack or a snap or something? It's not an isolated runtime environment. It's not isolated like a container or no C groups or any of the rest of that. It's the same sort of idea of having a self-contained, everything included here. And when a package relies on another package, it's going to look at the specific version that that you do at the build time, and that's hashed and immutable, so it's always going to be the same as the day that you locked it. Just like a composer has a lock file, there's a flake lock file as well that specifies the hash level of everything that's in there. And then Nix develop. This is what makes Nix popular among a lot of developers is these development shells. You can basically specify what packages do you want available in your shell, and by running Nix develop, it installs all those and uses environment variables to add paths so that everything in there is just available on your shell. And you can have init scripts that run when you start it. There's all sorts of build and configure steps that you can put in here to have things just automatically run in the shell. I don't really worry about that doing Drupal with everything in PHP. We don't really have that complexity. There's also checks. I haven't even gotten into this. I don't really know how this works, but this is a testing framework that's built in, and it checks the integrity of the Nix flake but it can also kick off test runners of any kind that you want to put in here. Make derivation, that's making a package, so it is what is going into the package, but that can just extend another package and add a couple of tools to it, or you know, and there's all the different phases for setting it up. Home Manager, this is another target. So this is a program that will manage your home directory. It's like a dot file manager is what a lot of people are using it for. So they can keep their configuration in a Git repo and apply it on any machine. We're finding this particularly useful for things like DRenv. I'll point to it later, but I have a blog post on installing DRenv using Home Manager. And so this is how you manage a home directory. In this case, the modules is actually loading what I want in there from a different file. And then NixOS itself is managed the same way. So this is the same sort of flake that kicks off building entire server operating systems, desktops, laptops. So when I wanted to start using stuff, I built up one of these, and my wife was like, "I'm tired of being out of date. Can you do it on mine?" And I just added a stanza for her machine and said, "Go apply," and boom, she's got all the software I've got, and we now have it broken out into different sets and everything. So yeah, different commands for kicking it off, and even beyond that. There's different ways of doing more than that. So deploy RS is what we're starting to use for actually managing servers that are running NixOS. And you define targets for deployments, and it doesn't have to be NixOS. It can be Home Manager, it can be development flakes. It'll deploy anything that's flake-based to any targets you define. And it'll do it in a single command. You can write deploy, and it does everything that it knows about. My thing, it takes about 45 minutes to do 8 machines right now. So, templates. This is the last functionality that we're gonna, go in, see here, and this is basically the ability to take the flake that you've defined and easily deploy it in a new project. And that's what I've built for the Drupal flake, is a template that you can run this command and be up and running in your local development environment in an existing project or brand new. So that's kind of the Nix ecosystem from a Flakes point of view, but all of those things predate Flakes. Flakes kind of put it in one encapsulated place, and really the big thing it adds is the lock file, so that when you put it anywhere else, it's going to be exactly the same versions everywhere. And it's just a way of having it be immutable. And where it goes in all these cases, it goes into a Nix store on your computer. It's /Nix/store. There are a few other places it can go, but primarily it's here. And it basically, every package, every derivation it compiles gets its own directory with the hash of the inputs in the file name. And so if you get a new version or there's any change whatsoever to the source, you get a new derivation on the output. And then any package that relies on any other package, it has the hash in the file name that it was built with, and so you can't break it. It's just there. And one of the super nice things about this is if something breaks and it doesn't work anymore, you can just roll back to the previous generation. You can just revert your lock file, rebuild, and you're there. If it's on a NixOS, it adds a new line to the boot manager and grub, and you can just pick the previous generation. And the entire system is a single derivation. So you roll it back one, and it's linked to an entirely different set of packages as it was. So when you boot into the previous generation, all your software is reverted to what it was in the previous generation. It's really amazing. That, to me, is one of the biggest things that really gives comfort. Any questions on this before we move on? This is kind of one of the meatier parts. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier one of the packages that you talked about different outputs, like document does that end up being a frequent issue where something may not have a version of work on macOS?
Yeah, so the question is if, relating to the systems, if there isn't a package available on Mac OS, for example, what does it work? I haven't really run it. I don't have a Mac, so I don't really know, but I think my impression is people are building it this way by default. Systems are kind of one of those fundamental requirements here. And so there's Mac OS versions of whatever it is that you're building, and so it is like System D is what NixOS uses and a lot of Linux flavors, and I think there's an equivalent in Mac OS that most of the packages just include. That's where there's all these libraries to just pull in the stuff that you need per system, and it just gets modified then. So let's solve those original problems. This is what I actually sort of went through. So these are real scenarios. Oh, before we get there, let's install Nix. So if you want to try this out, there is a cool demo coming up that you could try out in a few minutes. So this gives you time if we don't crash the conference Wi-Fi here. There's two different flavors, and this is one of the things that is kind of a so I get the impression, and I'm not involved, I don't know anything about this other than what I've seen on various forums, but there's kind of two forks right now that are prominent. The vanilla Nix is the regular Nix stuff, and it's what I've been using, and it's all there. And Flakes are still considered experimental. And the Nix command goes with Flakes as the shell tool. And so if you are installing vanilla Nix, to use Flakes, you have to set these extra experimental things in there. So Determinate Systems is a company that is kind of like the Acquia for Nix. It's founded by the owner, or the original author of Nix. His name is Eelco, and he did this as a grad student, so very similar sort of things. He's nowhere near as personable or charismatic as Dries, so he's kind of much more in the back and not really that involved in a lot of this stuff. But his company has just in the last month released a new version of Nix, of their version of Nix, that comes with Flakes and Nix command active by default, and they're saying it's stable now, we're good to go, and a lot of the rest of the community is like, we're still not sure, there's still these things, there seems to be some divide there. Once you get it installed, it seems like it's mostly the same. I think there might be some subtle differences that I haven't even learned what they are, so I don't really know what the differences are. I've run both of these, both of them seem fine. So those are the places to start it. Both of them have a one-liner in your shell that will walk you through setting it up. They both give you a nice little summary of what they're going to do before they do it. And then you can enter your sudo password and it'll make all the changes to your system. This just installs essentially the Nix package manager and the language on your computer, and it runs in Windows services for Linux and Mac. And so with this, you can install this on any existing machine and start using Nix. It's not NixOS, it's just Nix, the package manager. So back to our can't build this React app. So here's the error I was getting is digital. It has to do with TLS upgrades, and there wasn't new enough TLS and Node.js and all this stuff. And we started updating the packages, got a few hours in, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. We're trying to make one CSS change, and let me just try this. And I started it with the old style. I didn't even know what Flakes were or anything, but I found something that said, here's how to create a shell.nix and a website. So there's this website that will give you a list of old software packages. So because it's a Git repo and has been from day one, you can travel back in time And so we went back to 2015 here and found a version of Node.js that version 12 built in September of 2022. And we got the commit hash for the Nix packages repo at that commit level. And then here's what it tells you. It gives you nice instructions of how to use it. You can just use it directly or drop it into a shell. So we dropped it into a shell.nix file, and that's basically it. That's the entire thing. And then you run nix-shell, and then we can install npm and yarn from there. And well, I already had yarn in the shell.nix. And yarn prod built it successfully. And literally, it was like half an hour, and I was hooked. So trying out new software. This is another thing that Nix Shell does. So with Nix-shell-p for the program, you can go and install any of 120,000 packages that are in the Nix package repository. It's the largest software package repository of any OS. All sorts of things are in here. So in this, I basically I did have to give it a command, say, hey, it's not just open source software. Give me this unfree version of Opera. And then it opened up the shell. I typed Opera, and there's all the stuff that the shell outputs. But there I was in Opera, which I didn't ever have installed before. You can do this on a Mac. All you need to do is install Nix. Nix-shell-p, install whatever software you want. Server software, desktop software, lots of it. Not all of it works, but most of it does. There's been a few things I've tried installing that don't work, but just even trying out all sorts of desktop software. This is super easy. And the cool thing is, you leave this directory and it is gone. It is cached in the Nix store, but if you run the garbage collect commands that was on one of the earlier slides, it's gone. It's nowhere in your system. So for trialing software, this is just, I think this is just amazing. It's so easy to just test things out. And there's tons of things that are packaged for it that it's just a command away. So problem number 3. This is a little bit harder. This one is when I started using flakes. I found a flake for PHP development that basically I put it in my project, and you can see on line 33 there, the version of PHP. It builds everything from there. It's basically just finding this. This is a PHP flake that I found from GitHub. There is a Drupal block in here. But most of this I found really confusing and hard to use. And so I kind of ended up saying, well, I'm really confused. This did not make me happy with it. It did solve our problem. We have used this now in production on a bunch of sites that needed PHP 8.3 while our servers are all still running PHP 8.1. This allows us now to target specific sites with different versions and run Drush then and do all that. But it was not easy to use. So started working on this Drupal flake. Before doing that, I started looking around at what are the options here? How do I even go about doing this? What can I do for a development environment? And so there are actually, I found, well, I've forgotten all the ones that I've found, but I found at least 3 that I could find when I put the slides together that are based on Nix here, that are development environments dedicated to Nix. DevEnv turns out to be, I think is probably the leading one. It's a pretty popular one. The second link there is someone in the Drupal community that built this. And I've chatted with him a little bit. He has a starter for DevEnv that does build a Drupal environment. I tried running it. It didn't work in my Linux. I gave him some fixes, got it working. But DevEnv is a separate program you have to install, and there's a bit more setup needed. And I still wasn't really happy with that. DevBox is another one that I hadn't heard of at all until someone reached out to me a week ago saying, hey, do you know about this? Couldn't make it to DrupalCon, but he's built a Drupal stack here for DevBox. I have not had a chance to try that out to know how that compares, but that's another, supported dev environment sort of thing. Dev shell seems a little bit lighter weight, a little bit closer to sort of the Nix way of doing things. And again, I didn't have a chance to really try it out because what I found and liked was services flake. So this is a way of specifying services in their own individual files and just pass in the configuration you need, very declarative, and lots of little functions to make it work well. And I really like that approach. It doesn't have, it has lots of software in there. There's lots of things like, there is Nginx, there is Postgres, there is, a bunch of Apache servers. There's no Solr, there's no Caddy, there's no PHP. So I still had to kind of bridge that gap, but that approach I really liked. So that's what I built on top of is Services Flake, and that's what the Drupal Flake is based on. And then DDev. So obviously we all love DDev. I've been using DDev for years, and I like it. And this is more, for me, it has been an experiment in what would it look like in a Nix flow. And once I have it done, I'm finding I'm liking it a lot. There's a few paper cuts that DDev that this actually solves. Things like Xdebug, the way they've implemented it. I always like having my little browser helper to turn it on and off, and rather than having it all on or all off. and I've gone in and changed that in DDev and stuff, but it's just little tiny things. So here we go. So before getting to running Drupal CMS with a single command, you do need to have Nix installed. And direnv is really useful. So how many people are using direnv or are familiar with it? Nobody. Yeah, I'm surprised. So we were using Drupal Launcher or Drush Launcher for a long time because, just to get bridge the gap from Drupal 7 and Drupal 9, trying to get the right version. And when that was deprecated, one of their top recommendations is direnv. What it does is it basically watches your shell, and when you change into a directory that has a .envrc file, it runs the command. It runs the commands in there, or a certain set of commands, and sets environment variables from that. So that's a super convenient thing. And to get full functionality out of Drupal Flake, you do need to have that running. You can do the basic without it, but it's much easier with that. And so the link at the bottom is my blog post on setting up Home Manager to load direnv. It's a little tricky. That is the tricky bit. But again, not necessary for the single command. Everybody ready for it here? Okay. Boom. That right there will install and run Drupal CMS. And just to show it, we're going to do it as a demo here, if I can get the screen up. Okay, so first off, I'm going to make an empty directory. If I can type and watch at the same time. Empty. Okay. Okay, so we're in a brand new empty directory, nothing here, nothing running. And we run our command. So what this did is first it went out to GitHub, loaded the flake, which is just it's just a couple hundred lines of code, and it started running it. It found the default package and the default app, and Services Flake is what is identifying these services, and it's using a program called Process Compose, which is not something specific to Nix. It's a general process manager for running things like web servers that need multiple servers running. So this is kind of our alternative to Docker Compose. It started up the database, the MySQL database, which is running, and then it kicked off this init CMS script, which pulled down, is using Composer to install Drupal CMS, and then it's running in the Drush site install now. And when I've been doing this before, it's been getting up to about 90, 95 seconds before it completes the normal Drush install. And then you can see the other ones, Nginx and PHP, they're just waiting for the script to finish. And when if it finishes completely, it'll fire up those servers as well. I have a Nix settings script that basically goes and adds, copying DDev's model here and just saying, hey, if it ain't, if it works well enough, we'll do it. So created a settings.nix.php file and add a stanza to the settings.php file to include it. So same pattern there. And then when it's all done, it should open the browser with our new site install, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, still running.
Do you need NixOS or just package manager?
So this should run on everything. This should run under Windows, under WSL2, should run on your Mac. This one command once you have Nix installed. And the browser just opened on my other screen here. I am taking advantage of Randy's ddev.site DNS for site local, but we're running here on an alternative port, and this is the site that just installed. And here is the installed, the generated password. We could log in and check it out and see all of it, but it's literally that's all it takes. Yeah. Now, there's a few things that are, well, there's a lot of things that are interesting about this. We're really only scratching the surface, but I think we're doing okay on time. This did not actually install Nix in this directory. There is a bunch of stuff here, but it mainly, if you look at this directory now, there's Drupal CMS and basically nothing else. There are two things that are there that aren't normal Drupal CMS is a data directory, which is where I put the database, and the socket that the database talks on. This is using Unix sockets instead of TCP ports, aside from the Nginx, to get to your browser in the first place. And so you can run them in multiple instances of this at the same time if you change the port. So let's go over the next bit of this. So for an existing environment, it's not much harder. It's a few more steps, but you can just basically go into a Drush or a Drupal folder of an existing site and do similar command, nix flake init-t for the template. This will copy the Drupal flake template into your local directory. In there, you'll get a .env file with settings for how to run the server. So I just have a few right there now. So the project name for what goes before .ddev.site, what port to run Nginx on, what PHP version to use, and you can pick from 7.4. I think there's even a PHP 5.3 available still, and if not, you can pin your Nix packages and add an overlay for it. 8.4 is out already. Docroot, if it's not in web, you need to set something here. And then Nix run gets you a really similar process compose screen. It does skip the install stuff and just runs the servers directly, but it does add the Nix settings. It does run the Nix settings job to auto connect your database. And then you have to go to another shell because process compose is taking the one that's running, and in there there's command or function keys to manage things. F10 will stop it. There's an F9 to restart. There's a bunch of things you can do and browse through and see logs and stuff. But in another shell, if you have dir env, then you don't need to do nix develop. You just you change into the directory, and it will build the packages for the shell, and then boom, drop you to it. And by being in the shell, you get the environment variables all hooked up for Drush. And so you can see the Drush status here for the site URI. This was just an example using Freelock there. The connect string has the socket path, and it just goes from there. So, so this is what's in Drupal Flake right now, and it's working. It's up on GitHub. So nix develop for your dev shell, and if you have DRM, the use Flake it would need to be in the .env-rc. That is part of the template, so when you pull it down, it'll hook all that up. As long as you have DRM available, you have to type DRM allow, and then that allows that specific program, saying you trust it to actually run stuff, and that's basically it. You're off and running. Drush or nix run, so the .hash demo, these are just nix conventions for where do you find the flake. You can basically pass it a GitHub address, a GitLab address. I was just trying to hook it up to Drupal's GitLab, and I didn't quite figure out the right URL, but I did go ahead and create a Drupal Flake project today, so brand new. So I'll probably change this to point to Drupal.org's GitLab in the next week or so. But it's all the same. The nix doesn't care where you get it from. You just give it an address. If it's local, you start with dot. The hash is allows you to have multiple packages in the same flake, multiple shells even. You can have shells for different purposes. You could have a testing shell that has more packages than your running shell or whatever you want to do. And if you don't want something other than default, you just pass it a hash and whichever name you want. And so the main nix run just stands that stuff up, and then you can import your database and you're off and running. The demo that is part of that main nix command does observe some environment variables, Drupal package being one of them. You can also pass it a port and a project name. One catch with this is because of the way nix is so deterministic about its builds, is it won't take anything from outside the project that it's in. And so if you want to pass an environment variable like this, you have to tell it -- impure, meaning, okay, what I'm building is not a pure nix package. And so that's it's one of the gotchas I didn't like about devenv, is you always had to use that. And then I'm reaching this point where, well, yeah, you still have to use it. So, yeah. There's a couple of scripts in there as well that I used for developing it. Some of them I've built into the shell, so they're available. Well, right now, just the nix settings one. The cleanup one may not be that relevant. I was testing this a ton when I was making it, so I don't know if I'll keep that one around. But some cleanup and a refresh is the big one, because how do you update your code? So nix flake update will update the nix packages and basically all of the inputs that are defined in your flake. But the flake itself, if we're iterating on it here and I'm adding new features, you won't get any of that unless you start a new project. So I was thinking that we needed like a refresh flake to make it easy to get stuff while it's in active development. So this is really just the tip of the iceberg. Nix goes so deep, and I feel like I am like just a little bit below the waterline of this, and there it goes on and on and on. But once you get hooked, it's kind of amazing what it does, and I am really enjoying working with it. Some of the stuff that we went over, and I'll go to the resources. This would be a good one for if you are interested in Nix and want to know more. I did just create a Nix channel a day or two ago on Drupal Slack. If anyone's interested and wants to try it out and work, I'll hang out there and just take it from there. So aside from that, that's basically it. Any questions? Yeah.
Just curious, are you experiencing any performance gains besides the
Yeah, so the question is, do I notice any performance difference between this and DDev? Um, it's hard to say. From what I've heard on Macs, Docker is a big performance issue, and so I would expect that it might be a really good. That would be a really good reason to use it. On Linux, it's not, so I can't say I've noticed it. It might start up a little bit quicker. It definitely feels quicker. What I really like is I have all my normal shell tools right there, and I don't have to type ddev first or whatever. It's those little tiny niggling things that that are like okay and workable. But having I've discovered a ton of shell tools by using Nix. People have configurations out there, and I'm using ripgrep and FZF and all these things that I'd never heard of before that I've discovered through Nix. And having those available while I'm developing is amazing. And you don't have those inside your ddev shell unless you install them all, and there's a lot of work to do that, or you can't access your database. So, yeah.
Have you run your Flake with Apache instead of the other web server?
The question is, have I run it with Apache instead of Nginx? I have not. I got it. I was trying to get it going with Caddy so I could provision SSL certs, what I was thinking I'd do is I would actually patch the services Flake to add that support, and then do it that way, do it upstream, do a pull request on that project. But yeah, I'm pretty sure Apache is one of the options. There's no reason why you couldn't do it. Yeah.
Can your Flake not install Durin for you? Like instead of having it pre-installed on your machine, like can't it do it as part of its first thing?
Well, that's what I do in Home Manager, because DRM needs to be running so that it's watching the directories. So it's a bootstrapping issue. I mean, you certainly could install it, but it's not running until you add it to your shell, which is the tricky bit. Yes.
So is it that Nix has direct access to the system ports, or have you looked into your Nginx Flake to see is it port forwarding? How is it now exposed, I guess?
So the question is, how is it now exposed? Well, what I didn't mention here is that command doesn't need root. So when you're running the Drupal Flake right now, you need root to install Nix, but once Nix is installed, you don't need root to do any of this. That's why it's not bound to port 443, because that takes root. And there are ways of setting the capabilities. I did run across stuff that said, oh, if you build it this way, then you can add the capabilities and allow it to listen on these ports. But that takes root. So you're either going to do it at build time or run time. And so I just punted on that for now.
And going back to when you were using it to run actual GUI applications, does it play nicer with Xorg over Wayland, or what are you using?
Question is,
XOS, so
yeah, the question is, do the GUI apps work better in Wayland or Xorg? I'm running all Wayland. I imagine X works fine, but that was another thing I got by switching to NixOS. Ubuntu still didn't have it when I was using that, and for installing it on NixOS, like once I had it up, it's like one line sets the desktop to Plasma 6, and another line turns on Wayland, and there's all these, not just packages, but if you go to search.nixos.org, there's a tab for options, and there's like 20,000 options that pre-configure software packages, and you don't even need to explicitly call the package. If you add the option, it installs the package for you, and then you just set the option that you want, and it's there. So for actually running in production, you can specify all your Nginx stuff in a Nix module, and it will configure everything you need. But the community is pretty opinionated about things, so there's a lot of extra little tweaks. I've been using Ubuntu for 20 years, and copy and paste out of different windows and browsers has always been a pain. I started using Nix, and it just worked, everything. Way better than I ever had in Ubuntu. And it's because people figured out a recipe and put it in the base package. And that's the kind of stuff that got me really hooked here. Yes?
When you're running sites in production, are you mainly running them in NixOS, or are you just using package manager?
Yeah, so the question is, when I'm running sites in production, are we using a Nix or another way? We are still using Docker in production for all our Drupal sites. I've started for some of our supporting, because we're a big open source shop. We run tons of different, we run Nextcloud, we run mail server, a bunch of stuff like that. All those I'm starting to move to the Nix configurations. But we're still doing all our Drupal and Docker. One of the reasons being, I do like the security isolation that Docker provides. And there's other reasons. Maybe we'll get there at some point, but at this point it's running everything in your main context, and there's no, so that's, you don't have that you get from containers. Yes?
Have you tried running stuff that accesses the GPU with it?
The question is, have I tried running anything with access to the GPU? And no, that's beyond what I don't know anything about doing that. So, yeah. It may be there. I think one of the things in Services Flake that attracted me was it was one line to install Olama locally and download an AI, and literally one line, and you had an open or your own self-hosted AI running with the browser all set up, and when I saw that, I'm like, we need that for Drupal. And that was really the inspiration to this. And let's see, looks like we have 5 minutes at the most here. Any other questions, or?
Not necessarily related to the Drupal, but did I hear you right that you've got NixOS actually running from Grub? Are you booting directly into NixOS from Grub?
Yeah, it's a full-on distribution.
Okay.
So it's like, but some of the cool things, again, I mean, there's so many things that I've run across already, and I still feel like a newbie. I've converted existing running boxes to NixOS. You can basically copy your repo of your NixOS configurations up and adjust it as needed for the machine. There's a command to get the hardware settings, because that's a big part of it, is what are your, all the interfaces and that sort of stuff. Drop that into the hardware file for it. And then there's a certain file that you drop in Etsy to say that, hey, I'm converting this to NixOS, and you run the switch, NixOS rebuild switch, and it sits and it converts the existing box into a NixOS box, moving everything everything that was en root to an old root, and you reboot and you're in NixOS. I'm like, damn, that's cool. Anything else? All right. Well, thanks a lot. Here's where you can reach me if you want to connect, and I'd say probably the best would be the Nix Slack room, or I'm often hanging out with Jurgen and ECA, and yeah, so come say hi, and thank you very much.